On my daughter's birthday, she said out loud. Mom, can you stay out of this photo? Just the real family, okay? I simply lowered my head and walked away in silence. They had no idea the apartment they lived in was mine. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. Mom, let's keep this photo just for our family, okay? My daughter Brenda's words cut through me like a knife as she gestured for me to step away from the group gathered for her birthday photo. I stood frozen for a moment, feeling all eyes on me, my son-in-law Richard's smug expression, my grandchildren's confused faces, and the pitying glances from guests who witnessed my humiliation. I simply lowered my head and walked away in silence. No one saw the tears welling in my eyes as I retreated to the kitchen, busying myself with arranging dessert plates while they posed for their family portrait. They laughed and smiled without me, as if I were merely an outsider, a stranger who happened to be there. Not the woman who had given birth to Brenda 69 years ago. What they didn't know was that the beautiful 3-bedroom apartment they called home, the one with the renovated kitchen where I now stood alone, the spacious living room where they posed for photos, the bedrooms where my grandchildren slept, it was all mine. Every square foot of it. I never told them. Perhaps that was my mistake. After the party, I sat alone on the bus heading back to my small 1-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. From the elegant furnishings of Brenda's home to my modest living space with its dated wallpaper and worn furniture. But it was quiet and it was mine. A place where no one could tell me I didn't belong. It wasn't always like this between Brenda and me. I remember when she was little, how she would run into my arms after school, how she would beg me to be in every photo, proudly introducing me to her friends. "This is my mom," she would say. Her voice filled with such innocent pride that it made my heart swell. When did that change? When did I go from being someone she wanted to show off to someone she wanted to hide? Perhaps it started when Richard entered the picture 15 years ago. A financial advisor with expensive tastes and a carefully cultivated image. He never said it outright, but I could tell he found me embarrassing, my simple clothes, my working-class manners, my outdated hairstyle. Soon, Brenda began to see me through his eyes. The invitations to family events became less frequent. When I did visit, there were always subtle comments. "Mom, maybe don't mention that you used to clean houses." Or, "Mom, we're having important guests, so please don't bring up politics." Each request chipped away at who I was until I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less visible. And now, apparently invisible. I never told Brenda about the apartment because I wanted her to have security without obligation. After her father died when she was just 12, I worked 2 jobs, days as a secretary at an insurance company, evenings cleaning office buildings. Every spare dollar went into savings. I wore the same clothes for years, cut my own hair, never took vacations. Also, Brenda could have opportunities one never had: college, dance lessons, summer camps. When she married Richard, I had managed to save enough to buy that apartment as an investment. The housing market was booming, and my late husband's best friend, a real estate agent, helped me find a good deal. It needed work. Peeling wallpaper, outdated appliances, worn carpeting. But the location was excellent, and the bones were good. I had planned to rent it out for additional income during my retirement. But then Brenda called, crying because she and Richard couldn't afford the kind of home they wanted in a good school district. Without hesitation, I offered them my apartment. "Just until you get on your feet," I said. That was 12 years ago. I never asked for rent, never transferred the deed to their names. Not because I wanted to hold power over them, but because I simply wanted to help without making them feel indebted. Perhaps I should have been more honest from the beginning. As the bus jolted to a stop near my building, I wiped away a stray tear. Tomorrow was Sunday, and Brenda would bring the kids for our monthly visit. An obligation she fulfilled with clockwork precision and minimal warmth. She would comment on my small apartment, asking when I might consider moving to someplace nicer, never knowing that I could have moved into a luxury condo with what the apartment was worth now. But would it matter if she knew? Would she see me differently if she understood the sacrifices I had made? Or would she simply see an opportunity? A property she could claim as her inheritance. Another asset to add to the comfortable life she and Richard had built. I didn't know the answers. But as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, one thought kept circling in my mind. How much longer could I remain silent? Life changes in an instant. Mine changed on a rainy Tuesday in April 1991, when the police officer knocked on our door. "There's been an accident," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "My husband John, the love of my life, was gone, killed by a drunk driver on his way home from work." At 42, I became a widow with a 12-year-old daughter to raise alone. The first months passed in a blur of grief and logistics. The funeral arrangements, the insurance paperwork, the well-meaning casseroles from neighbors that piled up in my freezer. Brenda withdrew into herself, barely speaking, her grades plummeting. I wanted to collapse, to surrender to the crushing weight of loss, but I couldn't. Brenda needed me. We survived on John's life insurance for a while, but it wasn't enough for the long term. I had been a part-time bookkeeper before, working just enough to supplement our income while still being home when Brenda returned from school. Now I needed full-time work with benefits. I found a day job as a secretary at Midwest Insurance. The pay was modest, but it came with health coverage for both of us. It wasn't enough, though, not with a mortgage, car payments, and the college fund John and I had dreamed of building for Brenda. So I took a second job cleaning offices in the evenings. My days became an exhausting routine. Up at 5:30 a.m. to prepare Brenda's lunch and breakfast, work from 8 to 5 at the insurance company, home for a quick dinner with Brenda, then out again from 6 to 10 cleaning corporate offices downtown. By the time I returned home, my hands raw from cleaning solutions, my back aching from mopping floors, Brenda was usually asleep. Weekends were for catching up, helping Brenda with homework, attending her school events, doing laundry, grocery shopping, and handling home repairs I once would have left to John. I learned to fix leaky faucets, replace electrical outlets, and patch drywall from library books and kind neighbors who took pity on the widow down the street. "You're working too hard, Barbara," my sister Ellen would say during her occasional visits from Cincinnati. "Let me help with Brenda, at least for a while." But I always refused. "We're managing," I'd say. "Besides, Brenda needs stability right now." The truth was more complicated. I was terrified of losing Brenda too, of her growing distant if she lived with my sister, of missing crucial years of her life. And perhaps selfishly I needed her close. She was all I had left of John, with his same crooked smile and stubborn determination. So I pushed on year after year. I missed school plays because I couldn't get time off work. I dozed off during parent-teacher conferences, exhausted from juggling 2 jobs. I wore the same clothes until they frayed, cut coupons until my fingers were sore, and learned to stretch a pound of ground beef into 3 meals. But Brenda never went without the essentials. She had braces when she needed them, glasses when her vision changed, and the right clothes to fit in with her friends. I paid for SAT prep courses and college application fees. I drove her to dance lessons in our aging Toyota, waiting in the car with bookkeeping work spread across the steering wheel because there wasn't time to go home in between. By the time Brenda left for college, a good state university where she earned a partial scholarship, I had been promoted at the insurance company. The office cleaning continued though, because now there was tuition to help with, textbooks to buy, and an apartment near campus to furnish. When Brenda graduated and landed her first job at a marketing firm, I felt a weight lift. She was launched, successful, independent. I could finally slow down, perhaps even find time for myself. I was 52 by then, with aching joints and permanent circles under my eyes, but for the first time in a decade, I felt hopeful. Then came the housing boom of the early 2000s. John's best friend, Martin, had become a successful real estate agent. "Barbara," he said over coffee one Sunday, "you should consider investing in property. Prices are climbing, and you could secure your retirement." The idea terrified me. I had always been cautious with money, saving rather than investing. But Martin was persistent. "John would want you to be secure," he said, knowing exactly how to convince me. He found the apartment, a 3-bedroom in a developing neighborhood, priced below market because it needed cosmetic updates. I used my savings and a small inheritance from my mother as the down payment, taking a modest mortgage for the rest. I spent weekends painting walls, refinishing cabinets, and installing new fixtures. By the time I finished, the property value had already increased by 15%. Martin was right. It was a good investment. Then Brenda called, sobbing. She and Richard, her boyfriend of 2 years, wanted to get married and buy a home, but housing prices had skyrocketed. They couldn't afford anything in a good school district on their combined salaries. "We'll have to wait years to start a family," she cried. "All our friends already have homes. Richard is so frustrated." I thought of my apartment, freshly renovated, in a great neighborhood with excellent schools. I had planned to rent it out for income, but, "Honey," I said, "I might have a solution." When I offered them the apartment, Brenda was overwhelmed with gratitude. Richard was hesitant at first, his pride perhaps wounded by accepting help from his future mother-in-law. But the appeal of the location and the spacious layout won him over. "Just until you get on your feet," I told them as I handed over the keys after their wedding. "No rush." I never asked for rent, never mentioned that I still paid the property taxes and homeowner's insurance, never brought up the mortgage I continued to cover. I wanted them to save to build their own nest egg without worry. That was 12 years ago. Somehow they never quite got on their feet enough to move out or buy the place from me. And over time, Brenda's gratitude faded, replaced by something that looked increasingly like entitlement. As I sat in my small rented apartment the evening after Brenda's birthday party, looking at old photos of us together, I wondered when exactly my daughter had stopped seeing me as someone who had sacrificed everything for her and started seeing me as someone to be tolerated, managed, and now excluded. I remember the first time I met Richard. Brenda brought him to Sunday dinner at my apartment, her eyes sparkling with that unmistakable glow of new love. He arrived with an expensive bottle of wine and a firm handshake. Tall, with carefully styled hair and a tailored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine advertisement. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Brenda speaks so highly of you." I believed him then. I wanted to believe him. The first few months were pleasant enough. Richard was charming, attentive, full of ambitious plans for their future together. He worked at an investment firm downtown and spoke confidently about promotions and bonuses just around the corner. Brenda hung on his every word, transformed from my level-headed daughter into someone who suddenly cared about brand names and social status. "Richard says we should be thinking about our personal brand," she told me over lunch one day, stirring her salad with a distracted air. I wasn't entirely sure what a personal brand was, but I nodded and smiled. Brenda was happy, and that was all that mattered to me. Their wedding was larger and more lavish than I expected. I contributed what I could, but Richard's parents, a surgeon and a college professor with old money, covered most of the expenses. The event was held at a country club where I felt painfully out of place among guests who discussed European vacations and second homes as casually as I might discuss a grocery list. Richard's mother, Vivian, looked me up and down when we were introduced, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Brenda mentioned you work in insurance, is it?" Her tone made it sound like I cleaned sewers for a living. "I'm an executive assistant at Midwest Insurance," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't mention the evening cleaning job I still kept to make ends meet. Some things are better left unsaid. It was after the wedding that I began to notice the subtle changes in my relationship with Brenda. Our weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. She stopped dropping by for impromptu coffee visits. When we did speak, she talked mostly about Richard's accomplishments, their new friends, the exclusive restaurants they visited. When I offered them the apartment, I thought it might bring us closer. Instead, it seemed to create an odd tension. Richard would give me the occasional tour when I visited, pointing out changes they'd made: new light fixtures, updated appliances, fresh paint. As if to emphasize that it was their space now, not mine. "We're thinking of knocking down this wall," he'd say, or, "This carpeting really should be replaced with hardwood." I never objected, never reminded them that these decisions should technically involve me. I wanted them to feel at home, to be comfortable, to have the stability I'd fought so hard to provide for Brenda. The first time I realized something was truly wrong was at Thanksgiving dinner, about 3 years after they moved in. I had arrived early to help with the cooking, as I always did. While Brenda was in the shower, Richard took a business call in the living room, apparently forgetting I was in the kitchen just around the corner. "No, we won't be upgrading this place," he said to whoever was on the line. "It's just a temporary situation until Brenda's mother." "Well, you know." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Exactly. Why invest in improving an inheritance that will be ours soon enough?" My hands froze on the potato I was peeling. An inheritance? I was only 60, in good health despite years of overwork. Was he simply being practical, or was he actually waiting for me to die so they could claim the apartment outright? I never mentioned what I overheard. Perhaps I should have, but confrontation has never been my strong suit. Instead, I watched more carefully, noticing things I had previously overlooked, like how they always had money for luxury purchases, designer clothes, expensive electronics, lavish vacations, but somehow never enough to buy their own home. Or how Richard's attitude toward me cooled even further when I mentioned that I was feeling better than ever since joining a senior swimming class at the community center. "Mother, you're not getting any younger," Brenda said when I mentioned taking a Mediterranean cruise with my friend Dorothy. "Shouldn't you be saving that money for, well, later?" "Later? For what? A funeral they wouldn't have to pay for? I already had a policy for that." The invitations to family events became more sporadic. I was included for major holidays but excluded from weekend barbecues, movie nights, and casual gatherings with friends. When I was invited, I often felt like an afterthought, seated at the far end of the table or left to make awkward conversation with other extra guests. My grandchildren Emma and Jason were my one true joy during these years. They hadn't yet learned to see me through their parents' dismissive lens. Emma would climb into my lap to show me her drawings. Jason would beg me to read him just one more story. But even this began to change as they grew older. "Grandma, why do you live in such a small apartment?" 8-year-old Emma asked me once, her nose wrinkling as she looked around my modest living room. "Mom says we're helping you by letting you keep your money for retirement instead of making you pay for a bigger place," 10-year-old Jason added, repeating what he'd clearly overheard. "Helping me?" I nearly laughed at the irony. They lived rent-free in my property, while I paid $1,200 a month for my one-bedroom apartment. But the most painful revelation came just last month, at a dinner party Brenda and Richard hosted for his colleagues. I wasn't invited, of course, but Emma mentioned it during our weekly phone call. "Dad was showing everyone pictures of our trip to Aspen," she said excitedly. And then Mr. Beckman asked how they could afford such nice vacations, and Dad said something funny. "What did he say, sweetheart?" I asked, my stomach already tightening with apprehension. "He said they were helping Grandma with her finances, and sometimes good deeds come with unexpected benefits." Everyone laughed, but I didn't get the joke. Neither did I, Emma. Neither did I. The morning after Brenda's birthday party, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with my age. The memory of being excluded from the family photo kept replaying in my mind, along with the casual way Brenda had dismissed me, as if I were a stranger who had wandered into their celebration, not her mother. I went through my Sunday morning routine mechanically, making coffee, reading the newspaper, watering my small collection of houseplants. At noon, Brenda would bring the children for our monthly visit, a tradition that had once brought me joy but now felt more like an obligation they fulfilled with barely concealed impatience. As I was changing into a nicer blouse for their visit, my phone rang. It was Brenda. "Mom, I'm so sorry but we're going to have to cancel today," she said, her voice rushed. "Richard's parents called this morning and invited us to their lake house. The kids are so excited, and you know how rare it is for them to extend an invitation." I gripped the phone tighter. "I see. Well, perhaps next weekend then. Actually, we'll be there all week. Richard took some time off. But we'll definitely reschedule, okay? Love you, Mom." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, dressed in my good blouse with nowhere to go and no one to see. The silence of my apartment seemed to mock me. It wasn't the first time they'd canceled, of course. There was always a reason. A better offer. A scheduling conflict, someone coming down with a cold. I was used to being the lowest priority in their lives, the obligation that could be postponed when something more appealing came along. With a sudden restlessness I couldn't explain, I grabbed my purse and headed out. I had no particular destination in mind, just a desperate need to escape the four walls that suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. I found myself walking toward their neighborhood, drawn there by some unconscious pull. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind that usually lifted my spirits. But today, even the blooming cherry trees and clear blue sky couldn't penetrate the cloud that had settled over me. As I approached their building, I noticed Richard's sleek black car still in its parking spot. That was odd. If they were heading to his parents' lake house, wouldn't they have left already? Perhaps they were still packing. Without really thinking about it, I headed toward the side of the building where their apartment was located. Their living room windows faced the small community garden, and from there, I could see straight into their apartment. What I saw stopped me cold. They weren't packing. They weren't rushing around getting ready for a week at the lake. Instead, Richard and Brenda were sitting at their dining table with a middle-aged man in a suit, papers spread out before them. Through the open window, fragments of their conversation drifted down to where I stood, partially hidden by a large rhododendron bush. The property values in this neighborhood have increased substantially, the man was saying. If you were to sell now, you could expect to clear at least $700,000, possibly more with the renovations you've mentioned. Richard leaned forward eagerly. And what about the timing? How quickly could we move forward once we have the deed? My blood ran cold. The deed? My deed? Assuming your mother is cooperative, the man, a real estate agent, I now realized, replied, glancing at Brenda. We could list as soon as the property is legally transferred to your names. The market is hot right now, especially for units of this size in this location. Brenda sighed, twisting her wedding ring nervously. That's the issue. Mom's been difficult. She doesn't understand why we need to sell. She's so attached to this place, even though she hasn't lived here in years. I gripped the garden fence to steady myself. Difficult? Attached? They were talking about me as if I were a senile old woman who didn't understand the value of my own property. As if I were the one being unreasonable. Richard's voice dropped lower, but I could still make out his words. We've tried the gentle approach for months now. Maybe it's time to be more direct. I just don't want her to feel like we're pressuring her, Brenda said, but her tone lacked conviction. Bren, we've discussed this. Your mother is living alone in that tiny apartment, while sitting on nearly $1 million in property value. It makes no sense. She's almost 70. She should be in a nice retirement community where people can look after her, not rattling around by herself. A retirement community? They wanted to put me away? I felt sick, my hands trembling against the metal fence. The independent living facility we looked at last month would be perfect for her, Richard continued. Safe, lots of activities, medical staff on site. And the proceeds from this sale would more than cover it for the rest of her life, with plenty left over for our investment fund. Our investment fund. Not my retirement. Not my security. Their investment fund. And if she doesn't agree? Brenda asked, her voice so low I had to strain to hear it. Richard's response was immediate and chilling. Then we remind her who has been managing her finances for the past 5 years. Who helps her with her taxes, her insurance, her medical appointments. How difficult life could become for someone her age without that support. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a garden bench. They were planning to blackmail me. My own daughter and her husband were discussing how to manipulate me out of my property. Not because they needed it, but because they wanted the money for investments. Their comfortable life in my apartment wasn't enough. They wanted more. As I hurried away from their building, my mind was racing. For years, I had let Richard help with my finances, reviewing my tax returns, advising on my retirement accounts, even accompanying me to meetings with my doctor. I had thought he was being kind, taking an interest in his mother-in-law's well-being. Now I saw it for what it really was. A way to gain control, to position himself as indispensable so I would feel I couldn't manage without him. By the time I reached my apartment, I was shaking with a mixture of hurt and anger. For hours I sat in my armchair, staring at nothing, trying to process what I had overheard. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. That night, as I lay awake in bed, a strange calm settled over me. The tears had stopped, and in their place was a cold, clear certainty. I had spent my entire life putting Brenda first, sacrificing, giving, supporting. I had handed her the keys to my investment property with no strings attached, asking nothing in return except love and respect. And this was how she repaid me. It was time for things to change. But this time I wouldn't be silent. Monday morning, I woke up with purpose for the first time in years. The shock and hurt of what I'd overheard still lingered, but beneath it ran a current of determination. I had spent decades being the selfless mother, the supportive parent who never asked for anything in return. Look where that had gotten me. My first call was to Martin, My late husband's friend who had helped me purchase the apartment. Though retired now, he still maintained connections in real estate and had always checked in on me over the years. "Barbara, it's been too long," he said warmly when he picked up. "How are you?" "I need your help, Martin," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I need your discretion." We arranged to meet for coffee that afternoon. I arrived early, rehearsing what I would say, how I would explain without sounding like a bitter old woman complaining about her ungrateful children. Martin arrived, his familiar face now creased with age but his eyes as kind as ever. Once we had settled with our coffees, I told him everything. The years of letting Brenda and Richard live in my apartment, the gradual exclusion from their lives, and finally the conversation I had overheard. "They're planning to pressure me into signing over the deed, Martin. Then they want to sell it and put me in a retirement community," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "They talked about me like I was already half senile, a burden to be managed." Martin's expression darkened. "That's not right, Barbara. Not after everything you've done for them." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Part of me wants to confront them, to let them know I heard everything. But another part wants to beat them at their own game." Martin finished for me, a glint in his eye. I nodded slowly. "Is that terrible of me?" Martin reached across the table and patted my hand. "Not at all. It's called self-preservation. And I think I can help." Over the next hour, Martin outlined a plan. First, I needed to secure my legal position. The apartment was in my name, but there were ways Brenda and Richard might try to challenge that, especially given Richard's involvement in my finances. "You need a good lawyer, Barbara. Someone who specializes in elder law and property rights," Martin said, writing down a name. "Janet Myers. She's tough as nails but fair. Tell her I sent you." Next, I needed to quietly regain control of my financial affairs. "Change your bank accounts, review your will, get new powers of attorney in place, both medical and financial," Martin advised. "And don't tell Brenda or Richard you're doing any of this." The last part of the plan was the hardest. I needed to maintain the pretense that nothing had changed. I had to act normal around Brenda and Richard while I got my affairs in order. "Can you do that, Barbara? Can you pretend everything is fine until you're ready to make your move?" I thought about the decades I'd spent swallowing my feelings, putting on a brave face to shield Brenda from hardship. "Yes," I said firmly. "I can do that." Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into action. I met with Janet Myers, who listened to my story with growing indignation. "Unfortunately, what you're describing is all too common," she said. "Adult children who see their aging parents as obstacles or worse, as ATMs. But they've made a critical mistake." "What's that?" I asked. "They've underestimated you," she replied with a smile that reminded me of a cat spotting a particularly juicy canary. "Now let's get to work." Janet helped me draft a new will that specifically addressed the apartment. She also prepared a formal notice that would terminate Brenda and Richard's right to occupy the property. Not to be served yet, but ready when the time came. Meanwhile, I opened new accounts at a different bank, gradually transferring my savings and setting up new direct deposits for my pension and Social Security. I visited my doctor and established a new healthcare proxy, naming my old friend Dorothy instead of Brenda. I even consulted a financial advisor recommended by Janet, who helped me create a solid retirement plan that didn't involve being shipped off to a facility of my daughter's choosing. Through it all, I maintained the charade. When Brenda finally called to reschedule our visit, a full 10 days after canceling, I was warm and understanding. When Richard phoned to check in on my finances, I thanked him for his concern and assured him everything was fine. When they invited me over for dinner, a rare occurrence that I now recognized as part of their strategy, I accepted with apparent gratitude. During that dinner, I noticed their tactics with new clarity. Richard casually mentioned an article about seniors living alone, highlighting the risks and dangers. Brenda showed me brochures for what she called luxury retirement communities, emphasizing the social activities and amenities. "I worry about you all alone in that apartment, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Wouldn't it be nice to be around people your own age?" "It's something to think about," I replied noncommittally, helping myself to more salad, "though I've been quite happy where I am." Richard exchanged a glance with Brenda. The thing is, Barbara, he said, using my first name as he always did, undermining my status as Brenda's mother, property values in this area have reached an all-time high. If you were to sell this apartment, you could fund a very comfortable retirement with plenty left over. Is that so? I asked innocently. How interesting. We could help you with all of it, Brenda added eagerly. The sale, finding the right community, managing the proceeds. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I bet I wouldn't, I thought grimly, but outwardly I just smiled. That's very kind of you both. Let me think about it. They seemed pleased with my response, clearly believing their plan was working. As I left that evening, Brenda hugged me. The first genuine embrace she'd given me in months. We just want what's best for you, Mom, she whispered. I hugged her back, thinking of the notice sitting in my lawyer's office, ready to be served. I know you do, sweetheart, I replied. I know you do. What they didn't know was that I had already found something else during those 2 weeks. Something unexpected and precious. While reorganizing my affairs, I had joined a senior center near my apartment, initially just looking for information about resources for older adults. Instead, I found community. The Tuesday morning coffee group welcomed me without judgment. The water aerobics class gave me strength I didn't know I still had. The book club engaged my mind in ways I had forgotten I enjoyed. For the first time in years, I was making friends, having conversations that didn't revolve around my daughter's family, or my inadequacies as a grandmother who lived in a tiny apartment. I was building a life that didn't depend on Brenda's approval or inclusion, and it felt like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. 3 months after Brenda's birthday party, I sat in Janet Meyer's office, reviewing the final documents. Everything was in order, my finances secured, my will updated, my retirement planned on my own terms. The only thing left was to address the apartment situation. Are you ready for this, Barbara? Janet asked, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she looked at me over a stack of legal papers. I took a deep breath. Yes. It's time. Janet nodded, sliding a formal document across the desk. It was a notice to vacate, giving Brenda and Richard 90 days to leave my property. Next to it was another document. A letter outlining my decision and the reasons behind it. You don't have to include the personal letter, Janet reminded me. The legal notice is sufficient. I know, I replied, picking up my pen, but I want them to understand. I need to say these things, even if they don't want to hear them. The following Sunday, I invited myself to lunch at their apartment, my apartment, saying I had something important to discuss. They agreed readily, no doubt hoping I was finally coming around to their retirement community plan. I arrived to find the table set beautifully, Brenda wearing her special occasion dress, Richard in a button-down shirt rather than his usual weekend casual attire. Emma and Jason had been sent to a friend's house. The stage was set for their grand persuasion. Mom, you look lovely, Brenda greeted me, kissing my cheek. We're so glad you wanted to talk. We've been thinking a lot about your future. That's quite a coincidence, I replied calmly. So have I. We made small talk through the appetizer, a fancy shrimp cocktail that Richard proudly announced had been specially prepared for me. When the main course was served, Brenda reached for Richard's hand, a signal that they were ready to begin their pitch. Mom, we've found the most wonderful place for you, she started, her voice gentle as if speaking to a child. It's called Golden Sunset Acres. Before we get into that, I interrupted softly, I have something for both of you. I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope containing the notice and my letter. With steady hands, I placed it on the table between us. What's this? Richard asked, reaching for it with a puzzled expression. It's a formal notice, I replied. I'm requiring you both to vacate the apartment within 90 days. The silence that followed was absolute. Brenda's fork clattered against her plate. Richard's face flushed a deep red. What are you talking about? Brenda finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I think the notice is quite clear, I said, maintaining my calm. The apartment is my property. I've allowed you to live there rent-free for 12 years. That arrangement is now ending. Richard recovered first, his expression shifting to one of practiced concern. Barbara, I don't think you understand what you're doing. We've been managing your affairs, helping you. I understand perfectly, Richard. I cut in. I understand that you and Brenda have been planning to pressure me into signing over the deed, so you could sell my property and put me in a retirement home. I understand that you've been presenting yourselves as my financial saviors when in reality, I've been subsidizing your lifestyle for over a decade. Brenda's face went pale. Mom, that's not, how could you think? I heard you, I said simply. Last month, after you canceled our visit, I was walking by and overheard your conversation with the real estate agent. Every word of it. Richard's expression hardened, the mask of concern slipping away. You were spying on us? I was standing in a public garden, I replied. But that's beside the point. What matters is what I heard. You two plotting to manipulate me out of my property. We were trying to help you. Brenda cried, tears welling in her eyes. You're all alone in that tiny apartment. By choice, I interjected. My choice. Not yours to make for me. You can't just throw us out, Richard said, his voice low and threatening. We have rights. We've been living here. As guests, I finished for him. With my permission, which I am now revoking. My lawyer has confirmed that legally, you have no claim to this property. The notice gives you 90 days. That's generous, considering the circumstances. Brenda was openly crying now. Mom, please. Think about the children. Where will we go? A twinge of guilt pulled at my heart, but I steeled myself against it. You and Richard make good money, Brenda. You've had 12 years without housing costs to save and prepare. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. You always do. This is about the photo, isn't it? Brenda said suddenly. At my birthday. You're punishing us because I asked you to step aside for one family picture. I shook my head slowly. No, Brenda. It's not about one photo. It's about years of being treated like an outsider in my own family. It's about discovering that my daughter and son-in-law see me as nothing more than an asset to be managed and eventually liquidated for their benefit. Richard stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. This is ridiculous. You're an old woman making a foolish decision out of spite. We were trying to secure your future. My future is secure, thank you, I replied, rising to my feet as well. I've taken steps to ensure that. New accounts, new will, new financial plan. All without your help. The shock on his face was almost comical. He truly hadn't believed me capable of managing my own affairs. Read the letter, I said more gently, nodding toward the envelope. It explains everything, how I feel, what I've done, and why. I've also included a proposal that might interest you. A proposal? Brenda asked, wiping her tears. Yes. If you wish to purchase the apartment, I'm willing to offer it to you at 10% below market value. My gift to you and the children. But it will be a proper transaction, legal, documented, fair. I gathered my purse and turned to leave, pausing at the door. I've loved you your whole life, Brenda. I've given everything I could to make your life better. Easier than mine was. I don't regret a single sacrifice. Not the 2 jobs, not the missed sleep. Not the years without vacations or new clothes or any luxury for myself. What I regret is allowing you both to treat me as if I were disposable. Their stunned silence followed me out the door. The next few weeks were difficult. Brenda alternated between tearful pleas and cold anger. Richard tried threats, then bargaining, then finally sullen acceptance when his lawyer confirmed what Janet had told me. They had no legal grounds to stay. In the end, they didn't take my offer to buy the apartment. Richard's pride wouldn't allow it. They found a house in the suburbs. Smaller than the apartment but nice enough. I attended Emma and Jason's housewarming party, bringing plants for their new bedrooms. The children adapted quickly as children do. My relationship with Brenda remained strained but civil. Some wounds take time to heal if they ever do. As for the apartment, I decided not to sell it after all. Instead, I moved back in myself. After 12 years, it needed some updates: fresh paint, new appliances, floors refinished. I took pleasure in making it mine again in my own way. The second bedroom became my art studio, something I'd always wanted but never had space for in my small rental. The third bedroom I kept ready for Emma and Jason's overnight visits, which Richard and Brenda reluctantly agreed to after the children begged. Those weekends became precious to me. Baking cookies, visiting museums, simple pleasures I'd missed during the years of being kept at arm's length. My social circle expanded through the senior center. I joined a travel group, finally taking trips I'd postponed for decades. I started volunteering at a literacy program, teaching adults to read, work that filled me with purpose and pride. Last month, Brenda called to invite me to Emma's school play. "The whole family will be there," she said, an olive branch in her voice. After the performance, as we all gathered in the school lobby, someone suggested a group photo. I automatically began to step aside, a habit born from years of exclusion. "Mom, where are you going?" Brenda asked, reaching for my hand. "We need you in this picture. Your family." As I took my place beside my daughter, I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but understanding. A recognition that love without respect isn't really love at all. I had spent my life being silent, accepting less, asking for nothing, disappearing when it seemed easier for everyone. But in finding my voice, in standing up for myself, I had finally gained something precious. Not just an apartment, but dignity, independence, peace. And in the quiet moments, alone in my beautiful apartment with the city lights twinkling outside my window, that feels like more than enough.